The Fantasmagorium show presents Guns, Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns. Pierce Brosnan returns. Lois Lane and Empress Georgiou. That guy who had to get his money back from Al Pacino and Glengarry Glen Ross. The cast? Heavens. Now, the soundtrack is a thing unto itself as well. Ricky Jay. That is all of yesterday's news, however, as we are, of course, discussing 1997's Tomorrow Never Dies. My name is Scotty. My opposite number, Catherine, is here, and Steve is adorned in American equipment whilst in Vietnam. How are you doing, Kat?
Good. Did you deliberately screw up the opening to mimic Carver going off the air?
No, I didn't do that on purpose. I couldn't get the video clip to work, and so I fired the hot Swedish chick because she messed it up.
I was giving you an out, Scott. That would have sounded cool if you just said yes.
I can't lie, though. I'm sorry. It's the only time. How are things going for you?
Good. I just finished watching the film.
And?
Still good.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think we both have a positive outlook on the movie. Should we talk about Katie Lang and Sheryl Crowe right now?
Yeah, why not? They both submitted songs, because what Eon does is that they reach out to particular artists and ask them to submit a song, and they tell them what the name of the movie is. And I'm not sure if they share the script with them. Some of them they do. And so both of them submitted songs, and they're both really good. And there was kind of a back and forth for a while on which song they were going to use. So eventually they went with Sheryl Crowe's song for the main titles and Katie Lang's for the end credits.
Well, you had to justify having Katie Lang's song in there at all, just because it is heavily referenced in the score.
Yeah, it's the better song, and David Arnold, the composer, picked up on that. So he really married that into the score.
And it's just one of those things where and not to get ahead of myself, but I think it is one of those things that is indicative about the whole movie is that there was just one decision askew that made this not necessarily the best, but it's by no means the worst.
Right.
However, I do have an unboxing.
Ah, you do. Let's see it.
I do. So when I bought around Christmas time, for people who follow my shenanigans on the interwebs, I got James Bond box set of movies. This is the Tomorrow Never Dies. It's on display, but over here's are the boxes that I had as a youngin', and I wanted to get them again, and I did. So when I opened them, I found this.
I remember that.
You could win a trip to Grand Bahama Island or one of a million other great prizes. Look inside for details. Now, it's still sealed. I don't know what is in this. It could be a trip to the Grand Bahama Island. I feel like Geraldo.
It could be, because it says it right on the cover.
It could be. It could be. What do we get? I get official James Bond collectibles catalog. Actually, those are dope posters. I don't even know if this is an order form where I can actually get stuff. Like, those are the awesome ones. That's some good art. Oh, it's like okay. There's an instant win game. Every game piece is a winner. $1 off of your next purchase of a James Bond VHS or DVD. Very thoughtful of them.
Just $1.
Sorry?
Just $1?
Well, a lot of people cashed in these coupons, Kat. 2.9% on a MasterCard or a Visa, sorry. I don't think I'm an instant winner. Save $5 when I buy the Tomorrow Never Dies PlayStation 1 game. Have you ever played it, Kat?
Yeah, don't do that.
No, it's a bad game. You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Or get a free movie on DVD from MGM. Moonstruck. So no, not an instant winner. Anyway, I just wanted to do that because I thought it was an interesting envelope and I wanted to see what it was all about. And I figured, what better a time than the Tomorrow Never Dies?
Yes.
Thank you for indulging me, Kat. So, any Any thoughts on Terry Hatcher right off the hop? I know you're very critical of bland Bond girls.
I'll
Is she
discuss that when we
bland?
get there.
Okay. Did
But
you have it?
no real news this week. It's made, I know, No Time to Die's made a little bit more money from the IMAX re-release, but that's only lasting 1 week. I would think it'd be cool if they'd get some of the other older movies remastered and put in IMAX for limited engagements or something. That'd be neat.
Well, and also don't forget we're coming up on the Oscars, and that is bound to be a thing for a re-release. And whenever a movie is nominated for an Oscar, they get a limited theatrical re-release.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Well, they're going to do it for Billie Eilish. It's like tradition now. Bond movie, best song.
Well, I think that's more so because original songs for movies hasn't really been a thing as much anymore.
Mhm.
And Bond has been the only ones really doing that for the last, like they haven't even consistently have had 5 nominees for best song each Oscar year anymore because it's too hard to find. It used to be an issue of God, which one are we going to not include? Whereas for the last decade or more, it's been, you have to really hunt for them. So it's like by default, oh, okay, Sam Smith, he wrote the only real original song and it's related to the movie. And so, okay, here you go. So I don't think they'll re-release it because the nominations come out on February 8th. And seeing as they only just re-released it now, to re-release it in another couple weeks, I don't know about that.
I was merely spitballing. I'm not 100% sure on how the business works entirely.
Yeah.
I'm just hoping, it's not going to happen. It doesn't matter how much I want it to cross $1 billion.
I had an opportunity to go, but I was like, you know what? I got my 4K TV and everything. I've seen it in IMAX. I'll just watch it here.
Well, and that's the thing. And I'm really enjoying going, looking at the Brosnan era is kind of, I have a different opinion of it now because I've seen the Craig era in the way that we've watched it. And there is some character developing here in terms of that's how I stay alive, sort of romantic, regretful James Bond. He's boyish and charming and he has fun, but he still has pangs of regret.
Yes, they did. I do think he gives a much better performance in this film than the last. He doesn't feel as stiff this time around. He's a bit more comfortable in the role.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like one of those things where he could have very easily had a closing. Like no James Bond really had a closing until Craig.
Right.
Like a bow, a proper bow. And I think that's one of the things that Pierce Brosnan, he brought that. I said this last week, and it's Dalton did the dark Bond first. Well, and Brosnan did the sensitive Bond first.
I dispute the terms of the use of the word dark, but
realistic.
Yeah, realistic. It's more realistic. And this one,
my mistake.
He has a little bit more sensitivity, such as there's a line in the beginning of this where he, punches the guy out when he's smoking a cigarette and he says "filthy habit."
Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, do you mind if I smoke?
No, but I can't really picture Brosnan's Bond smoking. No. I can't picture him sitting at a poker table with a cigarette sticking out of the corner of his mouth like Sean Connery and making that look good or passable. It just doesn't seem like that's him. So there's differences with this character as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall. I don't think Dalton smoked either, did he?
Yes, he did.
Or briefly. It might have. Okay, yeah.
I think he had one cigarette in each movie.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, Brosnan's a bit different and, foreshadowing past relationships and things. But yeah, we'll get all into that when we talk about the movie. But yeah, I don't think there's no more news this week. And this film is going to be celebrating its 25th anniversary this year.
Happy anniversary.
They started filming January 18th, 1997, and the Pyrenees standing in for the pre-title sequence. So that's pretty cool. Released originally December 97, and this is unfortunately, sadly, the first Bond film without Cubby Broccoli, who died in June 1996. And at that time, they were not even thinking about what the next Bond was going to be. But MGM, surprise, surprise, had another merger or buyout from another company. I'm not even going to bother trying to remember which one it was this time. But
Right.
the CEO knew that they were going to have an initial public offering around November 1997, and he wanted a new Bond movie out at the time to celebrate. Even though his company is not even mentioned in the movie, and the movie ended up coming out a month after the initial public offering, but okay. And so they felt they really had to rush this. And it's the only Bond film which surprisingly Barbara and Michael sort of throw shade at. It's like, oh yeah, we kind of had to rush that. It wasn't really. It's like, it's not really that bad of a Bond movie. So I was kind of surprised that they would openly, like with Quantum of Solace, they make a lot of excuses for it,
Mm-hmm.
but they won't throw it under the bus. Whereas this one, it feels like they almost regard it as, oh, the little, unwanted stepchild type thing. Like, oh, we didn't really want her, we were rushed or pushed into it. I'm like, dude, no, it's like this movie is like the James Bond version of a 90s action movie. That's what it
Yeah.
is. And yes, that's admittedly following a trend, but I think it works. And I don't think there's anything for them to be thrown under the bus about.
Tomorrow Never Dies is an interesting animal because, as we've discussed, and as we've discussed with other people, that Bond can sometimes follow the trend of the time. I think it was following the filmmaking of action films at the time, but it is definitively a James Bond movie because it mostly responds to the cultural impact of GoldenEye. I think that there's a lot of action scenes in this movie that are very video gamey, and that's because of the video game. I think that there are a lot of, like, the motorcycle chase is a direct response to the tank chase. It's like we gave him a tank. What do we do now? We take it all away.
Well, and the GoldenEye video game didn't come out till around November, December 1997, the same time this movie came out. So
right, so it's a co-explosion.
Right, but it wasn't in response to the game. It was in response more to that movie.
I don't know. They would have played GoldenEye before anyone else.
Right, but they didn't know if it was going to explode and become this cultural phenomenon like it became.
Okay.
But we'll get to that.
I can only speculate.
Yeah.
So, shall we discuss Tomorrow Never Dies?
Absolutely.
Delicious.
So this movie, right off the bat, worth saying is we have a lot more. David Arnold is a composer who leans much more into the classic Bond score by Monty Norman, much more so than Eric Serra did. And in fact, Eric Serra, as I forgot to mention, didn't even use the Bond score. It was other composer who was brought in to do that for the tank chase. So David Arnold tends to be a fan favorite because he does make it feel very Bondian, and he does that with the opening credits. It's not like the big bombastic that usually get like da 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 da. He just kind of starts with da 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 da. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of slick and interesting. And I noticed when looking at the gun barrel, it looks like it's super bright when he's walking in there. Like there's this fuzzy piece of white film over it. I was like, okay. So we open up at this terrorist bazaar on the Russian border. M and the British yes, exactly. Very bland and descriptive. It's like, okay, that tells me a lot. And M and the British Admiral of the British Navy are watching from this war room somewhere, presumably back in England. And we're alerted to that the camera that we're seeing, I guess, is on Bond, like a GoPro or something, I guess. We never really get to see the camera. And a new character we're introduced to off the bat is Robinson. He's, I guess, the replacement for Bill Tanner for the rest of the Brosnan era. I like the change.
Yeah, me too.
I think he's a really great character. I think he and M bounce off each other rather well, as they do in other movies. So I like that he's on the phone with Bond and we can't hear Bond's voice. He's just kind of arguing with him. And you have this really stubborn admiral who he's like, okay, he's seen what he's seen. Oh, there's they identify one of the terrorists as Henry Gupta, a UC Berkeley leftist radical who's selling his politics on the black market, as it were. And they see him purchasing a red box, which they call an encoder belonging to the CIA. And M's like, I wonder if the CIA will be more upset at the fact that they lost it or we found it. And the admiral, being really stubborn, decided, I've seen enough. We're going to order a strike. And M's like, what are you doing? My man's still out there. He's like, no. And he picks up the phone and he calls the ship and he says, they're using chess references like white knight to white bishop. Deploy the missile. And they're like, okay. So they fire the missile. And then he turns around and looks at M and he's like, your man's mission is done, M. Get him out of there. So Robinson's like, okay, Bond, get out of there. And all of a sudden, Bond kind of shifts the camera to look at this jet that's parked there, an L-39 Albatross. I was like, and Robinson's like, okay, I can see it. What's the big deal? It's a jet that's behind a Jeep. What do you want? And again, we still can't hear what Bond's telling him. But Robinson's like, just get out of there. And then the Jeep pulls out of the way, and we see that there are 2 Soviet nuclear bombs on the wings of these jets. Because yeah, it's I don't even know if that's a thing, but it's like, okay. And the British admiral sees this. He's like, oh my god. So he turns, and M's like, you have to abort the missile. So he calls and he tells him to abort the missile, but of course it's out of range and it's not going to work. And also in the war room, for some reason, is a Russian general or something. And
it signify the end of the Cold War.
Right. And the admiral turns to him. He's like, can't you people keep any of your stuff locked down? And Bond is, and then finally we get to see James Bond nearly 5 minutes into the sequence for the first time. And right, it works. I'm not complaining about it. I think it really works because they're building it up. And he's lighting this guy's cigarette, providing him the match. And then he looks up and Bond just punches him out. And he's like, filthy habit. It's like, okay, you're already putting your foot down on why you didn't smoke in the last movie. You're moving him further into the modern era. Because certainly by now it's well known that cigarettes and smoking is really bad for your health. And maybe we shouldn't be trying to associate that with Bond being one of the cool aspects of James Bond. No offense. But
I'm not offended. Okay. I'm killing myself softly.
Yes. So Bond punches the guy out and he grabs his machine gun and he starts making his way across the tarmac, and Robinson's like, oh god, he's going for the bombs. And I love how this whole sequence is intercut with like the missile flying through the canyon and the British Navy guys looking at their monitors on the computer, and the guys in the war room are kind of like all worried about it, like, oh shit. As Bond makes his way across the tarmac and he eventually gets over to the jet, kills a couple guys, gets up into the cockpit, and he actually picks up the chop blocks to knock this guy, this gun out of this back co-pilot's hands. And he figures that it's done, it's finished. He pulls the pilot out of his seat and throws him out, stands up there, just starts shooting some more. He then gets into the jet, and we have like a mini foreshadowing of the Aston Martin Gatling gun scene from No Time to Die, where Bond just starts turning the jet around in circles, firing at everything at the bazaar, fires a couple missiles as well, and takes out these 2 Gatling guns on a truck that were trying to take him out. And he starts casually... Yes, and then he starts casually making his way down the runway. We see that Gupta takes off in a Jeep, and there's another pilot there and another L-39, and he sees what's going on. He starts following Bond down the runway. And Robinson the whole time keeps updating Bond. You have like a minute left. You have 30 seconds, when the missile's coming. And it's funny because Bond kind of slowly taxis out to the end of the runway. He turns around, starts taking off at high speeds down the runway towards this other plane. He pulls up right at the last second before he's going to hit, right when the missile hits, blows the bazaar to bits. He flies through the explosion, and that's when all the cameras, of course, cut out on the feed. And M and Robinson and the Admiral and everybody's looking all kind of shaken about it. But then the jet emerges from the explosion, of course. Bond starts flying into the canyon, and then we see that the other L-39 is following him. And the co-pilot, waking up from being knocked a bit unconscious, thinks it's a good idea to strangle Bond from the back seat. Because technically he's a co-pilot. He can't take control of the jet if he wants to. So he's throttling him, and Bond is desperately trying to do something, trying to pull the cord loose. And the other jet's following and starting to shoot at him. And so Bond has to actually use his 2 fingers to try and pull the cord while using his knee to clutch the throttle and rotate the thing back and forth out of the way of it. It gets a bit ridiculous. It does. Doesn't the co-pilot realize now, for all of these bullets flying by, that they're actually being shot at? It's like, maybe you should just let Bond fly the plane for a bit. But he doesn't, and Bond miraculously maneuvers himself underneath the other L-39, and then he reaches forward as hard as he can and hits the ejector seat for the co-pilot, and he just flies out, and somehow it rips through the bottom of the other jet. I don't know if that's even possible, but it does, and that causes it to fall out, and then it just kind of blows up randomly. And then Bond finally, he kind of adjusts his collar, and then he just calls into the war room, and he's like, White Knight to White Knight to M, or to Gunship, whatever the headquarters name is called. So White Knight. Ask the Admiral where he would like his bombs delivered. And then you hear all the people laughing and snickering, and the Admiral looks kind of embarrassed. And M is just really smiling. And that's another thing too that happened. The Admiral was like, what the hell's your man doing? And M's like, his job.
Yeah, that was awesome. A great line.
That was a great line.
So the Admiral, the stick up his butt Admiral, he actually, sorry, I got a little reverb. Hello?
He is a bit arrogant about things.
But he and Judi Dench were in a show called As Time Goes By, I think. It's a British show. You'll see it on
Yeah,
PBS.
a lot of the other people you see here have been acting together in other like theater and stage and things.
But this is it was an interesting sort of
Well, they played husband and wife, did they not?
They did, and that was like a long-running successful show. And so when it comes to the Craig era, I imagine that this admiral is still Judi Dench's husband.
That would have been funny, because you do see the husband only one time in bed, and you hear him say something. You don't actually, so that'd be funny.
Anyway,
I can picture that. Anyway, I think this definitely ranks as one of my favorite pre-title sequences in the whole thing. The suspense and the cross-cutting, I love this scene. It is amazing. I love it.
It is good.
Okay.
I kind of feel like it's a bit of a rerun of GoldenEye with the whole
the runway and you're in the mountains and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
right, exactly. That's the only thing that sort of hollows it out a little bit for me. I still think it's good, but it's not like it's better than For Your Eyes Only.
Yeah, see, I couldn't even remember. Okay, now I remember that one. That's how forgettable that one is. But yeah, I don't rank it that low though. This is very high for me. Definitely in my top 5.
And then we get to Sheryl Crowe. And then we get to Sheryl Crowe.
Yeah. So I like this main title scenes because, you got the silhouetted girls, but they do this weird thing with like X-ray vision, like hyper bright lights of like X-ray of Bond's gun and other neat devices. And then you get to like all the TV screens and all the media stuff. So I thought that was really clever. And it's, again, Daniel Kleinman pushing this whole idea of main title sequences forward, that it should really reflect the entirety of the movie in a way. And I like how, on the one hand, you're mixing all these loud media-like images with the really soft romantic images. And the whole basis of the song is that she's singing about how Bond's job is basically murder on relationships. It's a good song.
It is.
Not as hyper fast or fun as the Katie Lang one, but I can see why they picked this one. And you have neat things like all the diamond necklace where all the diamonds kind of take off and start floating around. That's kind of neat. So what'd you think about this main titles?
I enjoy. Well, you know what, Kat? This is one of the first like Bond soundtracks that I ever bought, and so I do enjoy Sheryl Crowe, and I did enjoy the opening credit sequence. And I agree with you in terms of the juxtaposition of the technology. Oh my stars! Even the booklet in this thing is like, it looks like Windows. It's like it wants to be contemporary and yet somewhat futuristic. And I felt that through the titles, but it was still also classic Bond.
Yeah.
Like
that was very great.
Yeah. So then
we get to enter this other neat thing where this is, I think, the third Bond film at the time, or fourth, I can't remember, where they tell you right up front who the villain is and what his game is.
Yeah.
The other time they've done this is Thunderball and Quantum of Solace and let's see.
I think Hugo Drax in Moonraker is presumed to be evil.
Yeah, we talked about this before, but I can't remember off the top of my head all chronologically. But yeah, this is one of them.
Yeah.
And I think it's the one that works the best for that type of storytelling, which now it's really bugging me that I can't remember what the other ones are. But anyway, From Russia with Love. From Russia with Love was the other one. That's right. It wasn't. Yeah, From Russia with Love, Thunderball, and then Tomorrow Never Dies. Those are the three so far up to this point where they tell you no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is the bad guy. And so the scene is you have this stealth boat, the scale of which is horribly off when you get to see the interior and just how massive it is versus
an ugly model.
Yeah, they're models, but when you get another sense of scale later, which is also really off. Anyway.
But I just don't like the production of the boat. Like, I don't like it. It looks weird.
Yeah, it looks like it's a lot skinnier, thinner on the top, but then when you go in, it looks like it has this massive interior belt. It doesn't really. It's like the exterior of it is for a different thing entirely than what the inside is. I like the design though. I think it looks really neat. It's one of my favorite villain crafts in the series. They're not
Well,
many.
it's not better than Atlantis.
Yeah, I like it better than Atlantis because Atlantis just kind of stays in place and doesn't really get to do anything.
Yeah,
We
but
never get to explore Atlantis either.
well, okay, all right.
I like it better. Anyway, so there's this stealth boat moving through the water. They're sneaking up on this British warship, and the British are being pegged by the MiGs, who are saying, "You're in Chinese territorial waters," and the British checking them like, "No, we're not. We're in international waters." And even though the British captain of the ship is telling his men to send strong language to the Chinese about how, "Oh, we're going to hold our position, fire on you if you try and attack us," he then quietly turns to his subordinate. He's like, "You absolutely sure we are that we're in international waters?" And he checks. He's like, "Yes, sir." And the other guy's like, "But the MiGs insist that we're in Chinese waters." And so the captain seems almost a bit kerfuffled by this. Like he's not really holding his ground the way you would think captain of a warship might be doing. Because on the one hand, he's talking really strong to this guy. Then he's kind of like, "Are you sure over here?" And then the pilots, meanwhile, are flying around and insisting that we're going to threaten to attack if they don't turn around soon. So then we see, meanwhile, on the stealth boat that this giant drill, which is pretty cool because they built. I mean, it doesn't operate for real, obviously, like we see in the movie, but they built it to scale for real, and the drills do turn on, which is really cool. And they
How
launched
does it move?
So it's a CVAC that's attached to like its big like tube, almost like vacuum type tubing. It's called a vac, and it coils it out, but it makes no real sense really. Like what's propelling it through the water? Because even with the blades turning, I wouldn't. It's like a propeller or something pushing it forward or propelling it forward, but I don't know what's inside that's allowing them to steer it. Like it doesn't really make sense. The steering mechanism.
The only thing I could forgive it was like maybe they stop one drill bit while another one goes faster and thusly moving it. And I'm sure that you know what? They're the ones who figured it out. So I believe it and I accept it. I question it, but for the sake of movie.
Yeah. So the drill gets launched, and the British report that, "Oh, there's a torpedo. Oh, the MiGs must have dropped it." And they're panicking, and they're told to brace themselves. But when it impacts, it doesn't like blast through immediately. And you get to see how this drill, it just sounds just like what you'd expect a drill to sound like, barging in. And it eventually rips through, and the water has to fill up pretty quick for this drill not to just drop. And it starts moving through the different floors. And Mr. Stamper, who's coordinating this operation from the deck of the stealth boat, he's looking at the radar showing the drill going through the ship, and he's like, "Now they're wondering why the torpedo hasn't exploded yet." And you're seeing it just zip around. And finally, the captain's subordinates tell him, "We have to abandon ship. This is too late." So the captain tells them to send a last message telling them, "We've been sunk by the Chinese MiGs in international waters, and we are abandoning ship." So they give the order
To abandon ship, at which point we have a weird, awkward situation of slow motion for no reason.
Yeah, and they're playing the music to make it seem really sad, and I guess they thought the slow motion would help emphasize that, which it kind of does, but it is a bit of a unique choice. And you actually see Gerard Butler has a cameo in this scene.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's one of the subordinates that's sitting at his desk who turns around and tells the captain something in a little bit role. So they're all abandoning ship. We see the Devonshire sinking. The MiGs are completely, the pilots are completely shocked because they don't know what's going on. They decide to fly back to base. And then a missile gets launched from the stealth boat, hitting one of the planes, blowing them out of the sky. And we have 17 survivors from the ship with their lifeboats, or with their life vests rather, making their way over to the stealth boat, not knowing what it is, just heading over there because they're in the middle of the ocean they need saving. And Stamper steps out onto the deck, and there's a guy there with a camera with a big smile on his face as Stamper and his henchmen just open fire and massacre all these guys. We then cut back to the war room, and M is just or actually no, we don't cut to the war room. First we cut to Oxford, and Bond is as he's saying, teaching a foreign language to the student as they're making out on the couch or on the bed. The phone starts ringing, and she's like, "Just ignore it." And he's like,
"They're not
"Sorry."
making out; they're mid-coitus.
And he's like, "Sorry, the word is not in their vocabulary." So he answers the phone, and Moneypenny's like, "We need you to come in. We're sending the fleet to China." And Bond's like, "Okay," and he hangs up wanting to talk about it. Then M looks at her, and she's like, "Don't ask." And M's like, "Yeah, don't tell." Just funny. And she barges into the war room too with Robinson and her whole little entourage. And then we meet new character, the defense minister, played by Julian Fellows. Also has acted along them a lot. He's the creator and writer of all of Downton Abbey, that guy, in Gosford Park. He's there and he's wanting to know what's going on.
I feel like he was in a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy adaptation.
He might have been. I haven't seen any of those. Anyway, the defense minister want to know what's going on. The admiral's advocating getting the fleet down there and we're going to recover the ship and retaliate immediately. And M is saying, not so fast. And she's like, well, we picked up the satellite pings of what happened on a satellite. And interestingly enough, despite that the defense minister specifically asked which satellite it was, M and Robinson respond in unison, oh, we're still investigating. And the admiral's like, oh, we don't need to investigate. We need to just get it. And M is trying to calm the waters. He's like, I'm trying to prevent World War III. He's like, oh, M, you don't have the balls for this job. He's like, well, at least I don't have to think with them.
Think with them all the time.
Think with them all the time. And he's like all frustrated. And the defense minister's like, enough. We need to make up our mind, decide what to do before this escalates. And then Bond walks in the room. And he's like, it might be a little late for that. And he hands them a newspaper. It says 17 British sailors murdered. And they're like, oh, my God, what's this all about? And the minister's like, well, that settles it. M, you then have 48 hours to investigate because that's as long as it's going to take the fleet to get there. By this point, I should mention we've also already met Elliot Carver at his headquarters in Hamburg, having got a call from Stamper telling him exactly how many survivors there were from the boat and that the mission was a success. And it's funny.
Carver also specifies to make sure that Stamper uses the proper.
Yes, there is Chinese ammunition. And he also tells Gupta to keep the encoder safe, and then he responds to talking to all his other representatives around the world, catching up on the news and how they're going to he says how specifically we're going to wreak havoc in the world today, and he's a kind of prick who will like make a deal with somebody and then screw him over anyway. So he's kind of
and also Michael G. Wilson plays a famous cameo. Consider him slimed, sir.
Yes, consider him slimed. He does. And so that's kind of what he's doing. And he's the one who Elliot's typing up the headline on the paper because he's like, just in from the hot off the presses, we're going to launch the network tonight with this tragic story of what's been going on in the South China Seas. But then he changes his tone and he's like, I want books, I want films, I want documentaries. This is our moment. This is big. There's no news like bad news. And the way he says that so dainty and like he's touched, and it's like this guy is clearly out to lunch, a malignant narcissist, a total egomaniac. And at the time, the role was heavily criticized, but I think it's a lot more poignant and prescient to what's been going on in the world for several years now.
A little bit of Bezos there, yeah, totes.
Yeah, a lot of guys there. A lot of Jesus. Bezos.
A lot of guys there. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Ton of guys. So he's kind of a nutcase. And he wrote initially 17 British sailors killed, and then he changed it specifically to say murdered because he thought that would be more alert. And because the defense minister saw that the Vietnamese were reporting they found the bodies with the Chinese bullets used by the Chinese Air Force, that's why we have to, and we're going to have to retaliate unless you do something or unless you find something. And so the admiral decides not to give her shit because he doesn't think she's going to find anything. So then we cut to the DB5 driving down the road with Bond, M, and Robinson in the back seat. Moneypenny is riding up front with her computers and like her whole portable office desk. You have another driver.
DB5? Is it supposed to be the DB5?
I think it because you see it drive by out of.
I thought it was sort of like a Rolls kind of thing.
Okay, maybe they got into another Rolls or another car. So they're in the car and they're talking, and M says, "I didn't want to tell the defense minister because he'd be pissed off if I told him I was investigating Carver, but." The satellite that pinged this incident was Carver's satellite, and the papers got out so quickly that somebody at the newspaper knew about it before the Vietnamese did, or before the MI6 did. And it's kind of odd because I get in peacetime circumstances where the defense minister might not like you investigating a global media network like that, but I mean, he seemed like a reasonable guy. I'm pretty sure he would want to know that, oh, by the way, this media baron was monitoring this, and he got his paper out a lot faster before any of the other intelligence communities knew about it. He would have been on top of that in a second. So it's kind of dumb and a bit of a plot logic issue that they're not sharing this information with them But I get it. They're trying to elevate the stakes by making it seem like, oh, because the admiral's such a jerk, we
No,
need a, the stakes are set,
no, but it's also one of those excuses that James Bond movies make. And I think that we're deep enough in terms of the cliches. We're in the Brosnan era where it's like, oh no, not Elliot Kava. He's one of the richest men on the world. Like Max Zorin, Stromberg,
Well,
Drax.
even M conceded in View to a Kill when Bond told him, well, it came from the leak came from Zorin Industries, so he conceded to allow Bond to investigate.
Mhm. Well,
And the defense minister did as well. So anyway, that was a little silly. But then we cut to Hamburg, and because M thinks that since Bond had a previous relationship with Carver's wife, that you can find a pumper for information. And Moneypenny's like, yes, James, you could decide just how much pumping is needed. He's like, oh, if only that was true for you and I, Moneypenny. It's like, okay, that's good. So he goes to Hamburg, and it's the night of the Carver media.
wait, speaking of Moneypenny, have you noticed how many women in this movie have short hair, short 90s hair?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he arrives in Hamburg, and that's where the Carver Media Group headquarters is, and it's where they're having their big launch event for their 24-hour news network, which at the time was a relatively new concept. You had CNN in, I think, early 90s, followed by Fox News around mid-90s. So
Yeah, but
it's kind of a big deal.
I mentioned CNN.
Yes. So it's kind of a big deal that he's launching this. And Bond introduces himself to Carver at the party as a banker. And Carver's like, oh, just a wonderful banker. And he's even telling his guests this story about, oh, it's not that they all had mad cow, this Angus beef had mad cow disease, but I beat this guy a game. He owed me $10,000. He wouldn't pay it. And I'm thinking, and his guests are laughing like it's so funny. I'm like, you realize how damn corrupt that is? To scare everybody thinking they're getting mad cow disease and everything just because this guy owes you money. And yet everybody's just going with it, which, yeah. So that was odd.
No, but the thing is, and I think this is a concession of the movie as a whole that I had to get my head around eventually. I think later, but everyone who hangs out with Elliot Carver is like some sort of weird henchman. I don't know. He pays people really, really well, and they are willing to fight for him at the drop of a hat.
Yes, and
they do.
It's funny. Speaking of that, they drop more hints when Bond does the typical Bond thing where he uses wordplay to tell the villain up front, "Hey, I know I'm onto you." Not a smart idea, particularly given the consequence of him doing that. Anyway, Wei Lin, the lead actress or so in this movie, she suddenly introduces herself at the party, and she lies and says she's with a Chinese news agency. And Carver's like, I wasn't where you were on the guest list. She's like, oh, I wasn't. I snuck in because I wanted to meet you. And because Carver's ego is just that big, he's not suspicious, and he totally eats it up. And he's like, oh, yes, China would love that. And she's like, but you don't have any, your news isn't, your company isn't doing business with China, which lays the piece of what this might be leading to. And he's like, oh, yeah, but he wants to go off and talk to her, so he does. Bond then decides that he's going to go upstairs.
Michelle Yeoh, you know what? I underrated Michelle Yeoh as a Bond woman. She's like really smoking hot and capable in this movie too. Like she's great. I think that I misremembered how much I liked Wei Lin.
Yeah, I like Wei Lin a lot. She's got a lot of spunk. She's got a lot of sass. I love it, and I like how she and Bond kind of snipe at each other over the fact that she's a communist and he's not. That gets kind of funny. So anyway, Bond goes upstairs to greet Paris, and she's there, and he kind of sneaks up behind her, and they have the soft music playing, and he says hello, and she turns around, and he's like, oh, and she just immediately just slaps him, and you hear people go, ah, and they're all gasping, but then they immediately ignore the rest of the conversation, and he's like, oh, there's something I said, and she's like, how about the words, I'll be right back? And at that moment, I just imagined that this is how he leaves all of the other Bond girls at the end of the movies when they go off and they have a short little fling to celebrate, and then he just says, oh, I'll be right back, and then he just disappears. And I loved how this is kind of echoing that. Even though the movie definitely hints that this was more than just a little fling, it sounds like they did have a serious relationship. And she's like, oh, James, you still sleep with a gun under your pillow? And he's like, oh, I'm a parent of the job, and they're talking. He's like, when you married Carver, oh, I kind of like him. But their conversation's short-lived because Carver suddenly comes upstairs. And they immediately lie, and she's like, oh, Bond's an old acquaintance from college. He dated my roommate. And he's like, oh, okay, Mr. Bond, you banker. And he's like, oh, we should talk some more, Elliot. And he uses even more wordplay in this instance to let Carver know that he's onto him. Like, oh, the discourse of information or disinformation or spreading ship. And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, the typical Bond thing. And of course, Carver is smart and immediately calls his head of security, Mr. Stamper, who apparently I guess he got on a jet and just flew from the South China Seas out here because Carver told, right after he got off the phone with Stamper, who was in the South China Seas on the stealth boat, he told the people on the monitors, like, tonight when we launch the news network, we got a story for you. So Stamper apparently took the boat back to the harbor and then caught a plane all the way to Hamburg in time for this, which I thought was, I didn't think about that till I was watching the movie today. I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't really track, but okay.
So at the beginning of the movie, they give them a 48-hour deadline to be able to investigate this.
Like almost
the travel time alone would prohibit what you're doing from Hamburg to Vietnam. Get out of here.
Yeah, from Vietnam to Hamburg. Yeah, he couldn't get back there. Anyway, Stampers puts his thugs in charge of taking care of Bond, and they take him into the soundproof recording recording studio room because it's a news station, so of course they're going to have that. The guard in the other room, or one of the other security heads, kind of looks. He sees that they're trying to rough up Bond, and he just goes back to watching TV, listening to Carver give this ridiculous egomaniacal speech about how he literally says the words "world domination" twice. He's like, yes, world domination, but not of governments, of ideology. And he's just going on about this. And I'm like, yeah, it's really not that far. I can see why people thought that was far-fetched in 1997, but it totally isn't today. And
but it's also cartoonish.
It is, and it's like we often on this show say it's of its time, but no, this was not of its time. This was prescient and unintentionally predicting the future.
Yeah.
And so that was funny. And Carver's henchmen, some of them have these like small baseball bats, and I'm looking at that and like, those are not Louisville Sluggers. And instead they're just hitting them with like these little squat bats. And like, Mr. Carver wants to know why you are so interested in his businesses. And they start beating him up and such. And Bond very quickly gets the upper hand. A decent fight with these guys, and he eventually throws one through the soundproof glass and then takes out the other guys. And the guard who had been sitting there watching TV is on his knees on his walkie-talkie. He's like, Stamper, Stamper. And Bond whacks him on the head. And Stamper, who for some reason is just back out on the floor, I guess, casing the area to make sure nobody else is, screwing around. He decides to finally go investigate, and he shows up after Bond is gone. And he sees how beat up everybody is. He's like, nah. And you could tell he's already taking this personally, which is setting up a showdown between those two characters later in the film. But Bond doesn't just take this beating lightly. He goes into the back room where the circuit breakers are, and he's like, timed, off the air. And he shuts down all the switches. There's a blackout. And like you said, the hot Swedish lady's like, oh, we're off the air. And Carver's like, what? We're off the air. What's going on? How's it happening? I don't know. Well, you're fired. Get out of my sight. And everybody's like, and it's like they're all trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And Bond just sneaks out the back, goes, and we then cut to back to Paris's apartment. She goes in and finds Bond sitting there. He's already down to quite a few drinks, and he reached for his gun because he was thinking about maybe shooting her or not. And he's talking to her, and she's like, James, I searched every day for your obituary in the papers. And he's like, oh, sorry to disappoint you. He's like, why did you marry him? And she's like, he told me he loved me. He's like, oh, really? And that's what he did. And she's like, oh, among other things. And then she telling, oh, James, your job, it's murder on relationships, and really pushing back on him. But that doesn't stop her from sleeping with him anyway. And
well, but also I think you're dismissing the relationship to a certain extent, because they do well. Like, I think that there is a bit of chemistry. Like, I wouldn't say that they're the most dynamic on-screen couple in 1997. That was obviously Jack Dawson and Rose what's her nuts. But no, like, I think that Pierce Brosnan and Terry Hatcher do have a little bit of that jaded lover longing for the past kind of thing that they were going for. She's never brought up again, but
right.
She reminded me of Tracy.
It's funny you mentioned that, because Monica Bellucci auditioned for this role,
which would have been better.
Pierce Brosnan wanted her cast, and he thought the producers were crazy to say no. And the reason they did say no, I take it, is because back in those days, they had a habit of wanting to cast the latest it girl to be the new Bond female lead. And,
we'll talk about The World Is Not Enough when we get there.
But they're even doing that here because Terry Hatcher was like a name back then. And she even recently came out and kind of threw shade at that role. She's like, yeah, that was just a thankless role I did. I was like, yeah, I get it. You're there to get fridged.
Yeah. Oh, good reference.
So anyway,
anyone in the audience who doesn't know what being fridged is, I recommend you use your local search engine.
Yes. So they're starting to make love, and we cut back to Carver's headquarters, and well, even before she left the headquarters, she tried to comfort Carver, saying, "Oh, it's okay, Elliot. These things happen," because he's watching the other news guys report on, "Oh, another embarrassing news. Elliot Carver's network went off the air tonight in their big launch event. Sorry, Elliot, but we didn't do it." And she's like, "Oh, don't worry. These things happen." He's like, "Not to me. Not to me." And it's like the guy is so dainty and so, it's like, what happened to you as a child?
But it's also, again, the chemistry between Jonathan Pryce and Terry Hatcher I was interested in as well. And
he seems too almost angry and fussy throughout that I don't see them as having any chemistry. And I don't buy why she married. It's like, why did you marry him? Oh, he said he loved me. And what, is it for the money? I guess.
Kat, I don't mean to be cynical, but the guy had a global satellite network.
Yeah.
Chicks don't say no to that.
That was another thing that was funny when the admiral was in the war room, was talking about, oh, our GPS global positioning system satellites can't be wrong, because they had to tell the audience what GPS meant in case they didn't know, which was funny. Like, why didn't you just have him say global positioning satellites?
We just got off the back of a movie that was trying to explain an electromagnetic pulse. It's fine. They have to explain it to the normies.
Yeah, but that was funny. Anyway, Carver now is at his headquarters. He's in his back office. He's alone, and he asks Gupta, "What did you find out about Mr. Bond?" He's like, "Well, blah blah blah." And he's like, "Spare me the mumbo techno jargon, please." And he's like, "Okay." He's worked 10 years he's been a banker for 10 years. He's crossed every T, dotted every I, and almost perfect. And Carver's like, "Meaning what?" And he's like, and Gupta's like, "He's a government agent." And he's like, "Okay, did you find anything else out?" And my wife says, "They know, is that true or not?" He's like, "Well, there's a lot of garbled mess here, but when you tone down through the garble, you find something interesting." And he plays the clip that says, "Tell me, James, do you still sleep with a gun under your pillow?" And the look on Elliot's face is great when he just hears that. And he's like, "Play it again. Tell me, James, did you still sleep with a gun under your pillow?" And no questions asked. He's like, "Maybe it's time to set up an appointment, set my wife up with an appointment for the doctor." And Gupta kind of turns to him slowly, not to say, "Well, are you sure about that? Do you want this to simply be an enhanced interrogation, or do you want to be..." He doesn't say anything like that. He just nods, "Okay." And then he just walks off. So it's like, ruthless. So the next morning, Bond is trying to tell Paris that, "I can have you out of the country in 4 hours. You really shouldn't go back to him." And she tells James everything he needs to know. Like, yes, he's got a private security locker at his warehouse, and gives him the address. And Bond's like, "Oh, you don't have to do this." She does it anyway. And she's like, "No, Bond, I'm going back." And she says goodbye to him and leaves. And I blame Bond for what happens to her later, because he didn't tell her that, "Oh, by the way, I've pretty much already told your husband that I know what he's up to, and this is a lot bigger than you think." Because had he told her that, I'm pretty sure she would have changed her mind and taken him up on his offer to get out of the country, within 4 hours. Instead, he doesn't tell her that, "By the way, I'm really pissing off your husband. I've already pissed off your husband to no end right now. So yeah, go back. It'll be fine."
The entire movie makes Paris Carver a sacrificial lamb.
It does.
It goes out of its way.
And so I think Bond should have pushed harder in that instance as well to make sure she was safe, and he doesn't. Instead, he goes down to that warehouse. He sneaks in. He's coming around through the roof, and he's sneaking down through one of it's like this trapdoor from the rooftop into the top room where there's a satellite there. And he sees Gupta and these security guards, and Gupta's like, "Be careful. This thing costs $300 million. You break it, you bought it." So what happens? No sooner than Gupta leaves, Bond gets down there and starts a fight, and for kicks and giggles, just knocks the satellite over and breaks it. Which was
awesome. I love that part.
And he hears this alarm. He goes up behind one of the doors. He has his gun, and then Wei Lin steps in. And he's not surprised. He's like, "Oh, looking for a story?" And she kind of smiles and ducks back out the door. Bond shuts it. locks it again by tapping in the keypad. Other guards come shooting, and that's when he knocks over the satellite. And this leads into a huge action scene where Carver's private security, because it's the 90s, they all got machine guns and dressed in like these suits. And Bond makes a run through the printing press, through the warehouse, just firing guns everywhere. As he's doing this, he sees Wei Lin using a rappel cord, just walking down the side of the wall. She just kind of waves, like she's just making a casual getaway, while Bond has to go back into the actual printing press. And you see guards who are like trying way too hard to stop him. Like there's a guy in like a red suit. He's pretty much unarmed. And I'm like, dude, don't take this so personally. But he decides to try and fight Bond anyway. And of course, Bond throws him over the ledge and he falls into the printing press and it's all blood. And Bond's like, they'll print anything these days. And then typical, you have more guys shooting at him with guns, and Bond knocks over the big reams of paper to try and block their way. And he eventually makes his escape to the parking garage, where he's going to get his car. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. He got his car from Q. He went to the Avis place. Shameless product placement, by the way, where you have the Avis people in their bright red jackets, and Q shows up there with a bright red Avis jacket and red tie. And he says, I'm here to discuss the insurance coverage for your beautiful new car.
I love the flourishes of the bump, bump,
yeah.
bump. Oh, it's so good. The musical cues in this are great. They're great.
He's like, will it need collision cover? Yes. Fire? No, probably. Property damage, property destruction? Most definitely. He's like, well, Bond, you better. I'm really gonna have at you if you don't bring this car back in pristine order. And he takes him over to this hangar, and he presses this button, and this crates, all four walls in the crate drop, and you see it's a BMW, 90s style. Doesn't look that great. I've never really cared for these type of BMWs. They don't seem very high-end or luxurious or gorgeous to me, but whatever. And he's telling them that, he's like, open the door, and he does, and you immediately hear this female voice, and he's like, yeah, I just, I thought you would respond more to a female voice. And Bond's like, I think we've met before. He's like, I'll grow up, 007. And he's like, and he tells him all the gizmos that are here, and he's like, but this next one I'm particularly proud of. And he chugs out this cell phone, little flip phone, and it's a remote control for your car. And the first thing Q does when he tries to play with it is he swings it backwards and slams it into the crate. He's like, it's a little difficult, and he keeps bouncing it back and forth. It's like, it just take a while to figure out how to. And Bond just grabs it out of his hands. He's like, I think I got this, Q. And he just perfectly drives the thing around and does donuts with it, and when the Bond theme plays. And you notice that there's like a mechanic working on the plane in the hangar, and he's kind of even stopped looking at it. He's kind of in awe. And Bond ends up speeding the car right back at him and Q's getting all wide-eyed, and Bond stops it at the last second. And he's like, grow up, 007. And that's when because that's right, he took that car to the media night at Carver's group and gave the car to the valet and said, don't let her push you around. For the voice.
True story. Yeah.
That scene did happen much earlier. So anyway, Bond gets out of the printing press by getting into the parking garage, and he gets into his car, or not into his car. He leaves by going back to. That's right. He leaves and goes back to Paris's apartment. Relatively easy. He's driving down the road, and Carver calls him because Bond had retrieved the red encoder from the safe at this building, and Carver calls and he's like, "Mr. Bond, you have, I believe you have something that belongs to me. It's two things now." And Bond's like, "Oh shit." So he pedals to the metal, gets back to his hotel room, finds that there's a news report playing talking about the death of Paris Carver, and he sees her lying there on the bed, soft music playing again. He starts kissing her on the neck, and then you hear the gun cock. And
okay. Before we get to Vincent Schiavelli, how do you feel about Pierce Brosnan's physicality towards a corpse? James Bond,
it's a
Pierce
little.
Brosnan's.
It's especially since he's walked into what is clearly a trap, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna start necking this corpse."
It's a dead woman.
Yeah, but then Schiavelli cocks the gun, and Schiavelli's like, "Okay, sit down, Mr. Bond." And he talks. He's like,
Dr. Kaufman
mentions that he killed her slowly, and he's like,
"No, he didn't say slowly. He said that she struggled quite a bit."
And it's not really clear how he killed her or tortured her or whatever. She's just lying, I guess, dead on the bed. And you could tell Bond is really upset about this, but he's at gunpoint, doesn't have anywhere to go. And he's like, I'm a and Bond's like, if you shoot me from over there, it won't look like a suicide. And Kaufman's like, Mr. Bond, I could shoot you all the way from Stuttgart and still make it look exactly what I want to. I'm a professional. Do not insult me. I know how I do my job. I'm especially good at celebrity overdoses, yeah? And then we cut to Stamper standing opposite the building where the parking garage is, and he radios his guys, and they're all trying to break into Bond's car, but it's bulletproof, sledgehammer-proof, and electrified. So that same agent gets on the phone. He's like, Stamper. And then Kaufman's like ready to shoot Bond, and then all of a sudden his earpiece just starts fusing in his ear. It's like, ah! He's like, Stamper, what? And he's listening to what he's saying. He's like, sir, we can't get in the car. And Kaufman's like, you can't be serious. He's like, it. And he's like, oh, and he hangs up. He looks at Bond. He's like, apparently they're having a problem getting into your car. I am to torture you if you cannot open it for them. I'm sorry. I'm embarrassed. I don't know what to say. I love that he says that because he's like trying to be one professional to another. And Bond's like, oh, okay. He pulls out his phone. He's like, oh, no, Mr. Bond, I'd do it, yeah? Then he walks over and takes the phone, and Bond's like, I'll just recall 3 and send. And this is another one of Q's gadgets, so it electrifies him with thousands of volts of electricity, knocking Kaufman to the ground. I believe the voltage was high enough from what Q said that it should have been enough to kill him, but he's still alive. He falls to his knees, almost like it was a mere less than a taser even, because he seems to have recovered from being hit with it instantly. And Bond grabs the gun, and Kaufman still got it, and he forcibly turns it, presses it toward his head. And Kaufman's like, please wait. I'm just the professional doing a job. And Bond's like, me too. And bam, shoots him. And then he goes back.
Say what you will about sentimental Pierce Brosnan, James Bond if he's softer. That's a hardcore kill. That was amazing. That was one of those.
And you could tell even in that instance he's trying to restrain himself.
Yeah.
And so he's like, he goes back over to start necking the corpse again. Which
yes, he goes back to the corpse again.
Yeah. So I got that order right. So yeah, he got the car from Q. He went to the media night, went back to Paris where they're blah, blah, blah. Okay. So
we'll always have Paris.
So he now has to get back to the car. So he sneaks into the parking garage and he starts doing the remote control to start driving it around the parking lot, shooting off its guns and such. Eventually, when it's speeding down one of the roads, he presses the button to pop open the door and he jumps in, leaping into the back of the car, landing on the side, and he lies on his side as he keeps driving it all over the place. They try and pull this really tight, like cling wire cable to stop the car, and he uses his little, the emblem on this BMW pops up, and it has these saw blades, and it just cuts the cable in half, causing it to just whack like a bullwhip and crash the windows of all these other cars. And he keeps
but that's the most unbelievable Bond car gadget ever.
Is it?
Yes.
Why?
Simply because it has to be at the exact height where you would have to cut through like steel cable.
Yeah, that's true. So he's speeding around and eventually he does actually
get cool, but it's completely unbelievable.
Eventually he does get a blasted hole in the windshield. He can't remember how, but one of the guys runs out there with a bazooka and fires it, and it flies through the car and hits one of the thugs' cars behind. So Bond keeps driving the car around and realizing he's not going to get out of this. He leaps out of the car without them realizing it. Drives it all the way up to the roof and just lets it go sailing, crashes it right off the roof of the parking garage, and crashing it right into the Avis car dealer car.
He returned his car.
Yeah. It's a way to just shove it back. It would have been great if they had like a reaction of like Q maybe still being in there for some reason when the car came crashing.
Oh no, I was actually when the car goes back into the Avis shop from atop a building and it just crashes into it. I'm like, oh, a lot of people died. A lot of people died.
Well, only the front part of the car seems to actually go all the way into the store. Most of the back of the car is still hanging out the back. So
okay, you keep apologizing for your British secret agent. I am going to report to tomorrow. The newspaper.
You do that.
I will. But no, I do really appreciate that scene, that chase scene in that parking garage with the remote control car with Pierce, like with Bond in the back seat. It shows Bond not only doing Bond things, but also a little bit out of his control, and he's having a blast.
He is. It's a very James Bondian thing, especially when he's lying in the back of the car and he's just smiling and laughing even when he's about to get it. And it's like, You realize this bazooka has to have perfect aim if you were to get out of this, since the windows have been blasted open now.
But I really enjoy that, and I think
do.
that's
That's what I
something
like about it.
that's
Fun.
not to get off track, but like I think when people look at say No Time to Die and they're like, that's not my James Bond, I think they're when they think of James Bond, they think of something like Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yeah. And
Where yeah, moving on.
Right. So then we cut to Okinawa, at the American military base there, and he's talking to Jack Wade. And
wait, what do you mean he's talking to Jack Wade?
Well, Jack
so
Wade
James Bond gets out of a helicopter wearing full British Navy commander uniform, which is my jam when I see James Bond. If I see James Bond, I want to see Commander Bond in full fucking uniform. Pardon the swears. But that's awesome. And then Wade shows up. Jack Wade shows up. And he's like, all right, well, yeah, no. And it's like, what the hell are you doing here?
Wearing white khakis and a tiki t-shirt with a fisherman hat.
To the point where Bond even looks at him like, how do you even present yourself? It's amazing. I do. And this is the last time that we see Jack Wade.
Unfortunately, but for the positive,
unfortunately,
yeah. Bond's walking along and he says, "So what's going on here officially?" Officially, we have no interest in what's going on. And Bond's like, and unofficially, we have no interest in starting World War. We have no interest in allowing World War III to start unless we start it. And then he's talking to this other guy who happens to be there, and he's asking about the encoder. And he's like, what? Like an encoder could send off a ship. And he's like, what? Like the Devonshire? And Jack White's like, whoa, nobody said the word Devonshire. Just answer the man's question. He's like, well, yes, if feasibly could send off a ship. Why do you ask? And Bond just opens the case and shows him that he has it. He's amazed, and he examines it. And he's like, well, sir, if your encoder was working, then these two spheres of the radar range should be overlapping, and they're not. They're clearly out of sync. And he's like, well, someone's tampered with your encoder. And he's like, oh, okay. And Wade realized it, and he's clearly he's updated Wade about everything involving Carver and where this is. I do not understand for the life of me why Bond had not informed M about where he found the encoder. Because it's like, okay, by the way, we saw Gupta at the terrorist bazaar. He bought this thing. We know what it is. Carver just happened to have it. His satellite happened to be pinging over this. His media picked it up really fast. And it's like, you might want to be informing the defense minister now that there's some shit going on. But I guess he decided he wanted to wait until he actually found the ship just to drive it home. So they're dressing Bond up because he asked Wade for a favor. He's like, well, because he asked the guy, can you pinpoint the position the Devonshire sank if he lines up? He's like, yeah, sure. He's like, Wade, I need a favor. And you cut to like a C-130, I think it is, Hercules, and they're flying in the air. And you have this guy, I can't remember the actor's name, but he's like telling Bond all about how you do like a halo jump. And
it's like, Sergeant Apone from Aliens.
Yes, that's right. That's who he is. I recognize him. And he's like, now, be wary when you pull the chute. You got to wait until you're 200 feet below Chinese radar, and be careful when you pull your chute. 90% of halo jumpers could die from drowning because they forget to cut the chute, or from smashing their head back on their oxygen tank because it's like a 200-mile-an-hour yank on you because that's as fast as you're going to be falling. So be really careful. And Wade's listening to this. He's like, sounds like my ex-wife. And as Bond is getting ready to jump, the other agent there, he's like, actually, there's something I discovered. You guys should take a look at this. And Wade and Apo look at it like, what? He's like, well, it seems that, yeah, the Devonshire says here, but it turns out it's not Chinese waters and it's not international waters. It's Vietnam. And Wade's like, wow, Vietnam. And the guy's like, Vietnam? And he's like, yeah, does he have any American markings on him? And he's like, well, the suit, the helmet, the parachute. And he's like, oh, man, if the Vietnamese get their hands on him, that'll be really bad, which is ironic considering that the Vietnamese don't get their hands on him, because you would think that would be foreshadowing, and it's actually not. So it's
kind of a throwaway joke.
Yeah. And it is upsetting that that's the last time we see Jack Wade. I really like that character. He's funny, and I could see why they didn't want him to be Felix, because even though there's been very different Felixes over the years, a Felix would never be the way Jack Wade is, as impersonal and jokey like that. That's totally a Jack Wade thing.
Also, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but like we do get a return of Valentin Sarkovsky, and Die Another Day was all about in inviting new characters for a potential spin-off someday. So
Yeah.
there was no room for Jack Wade in the future, and I appreciated him when he was here. It was great. He's just bombing about.
Another day instead of Michael Madsen, now that you mentioned that.
Yeah, that would have been better.
Yeah. Anyway, so Bond skydives out of the plane.
And this is an amazing sequence. Was this actually filmed? This was...
Yeah, they did this. They did a jump like this, and which is, I don't know if they did it from as high as they're saying in the movie.
Oh, sure.
They still did a jump. So he lands in the water, he scuba dives, and he finds the Devonshire, and it's like landed on this, like this big boulder that's holding it up from tumbling down even deeper into a chasm. And Bond swims in, following the passage that the drill made, and it goes all the way to the missile holding room. And he sees the two. What?
It's creepy with the dead people.
Oh yeah, there's a few dead people in there.
Like, it's kind of like a haunted house. There's some tension.
Yeah, so he makes his way to the missile room and he sees that the two nukes are missing, or the two. Yeah, and he's like, "Oh shit!" But then out of the blue, of course, Wei Lin shows up again. Now, it's not clear how she knew where the Devonshire was because she didn't examine the encoder. So, I still don't really know how she ended up here.
Exactly. She just likes to swim. She's been doing laps.
So they're there. And they see the missiles are gone. They're like, okay, we got. But then because they're not being very careful, and the ship is like teetering on the edge, they actually knock over some of the missile racks, and they start tumbling like dominoes, sealing the door shut. They can't get out and decide to go up the upper hatch, but they can't take their oxygen tanks with them because it's too big and it won't fit. So they take one last deep breaths and they help each other take off their oxygen tanks as they start swimming out this hatch. And it seems like they're almost too deep to do this. Like, that's way too much water to cover, but they make it. That's a stunt they repeat in the next movie as well. But they swim to the top. They break the surface, and there's like this Vietnamese fishing boat there, and they're waving like, "Hey, help us!" And then he's like, "Oh!" And then he gets hit by a spear gun. It's like, "Oh shit!" And he gets hit by another spear gun, and then he gets kicked off the boat, and you see Stamper's there, and he's like, "Get them out of the water!" And he's dressed in these dark green and light green striped shirt. And I'm like, "Hey, it's Steve from Blue's Clues," and with like the same brown khaki face. What the hell? So they get taken to Vietnam, and
Cat.
Yeah.
I'm older than you. I don't know what the hell a Blue's Clue is.
It was a kids show in the 90s on Nickelodeon.
Did it have a dog in it?
Yes, it was the blue dog. It was like animated with a live action like person there who was superimposed on it, and he wore that same type of shirt, and it was really weird. So,
do you remember Clifford?
I do.
Okay, anyway, moving on.
Yes, moving on. So they bring Bond and Wei Lin via helicopter to this Carver Media Group building in Saigon, I believe is where they are. Maybe it is Saigon. I can't remember. So they're in Vietnam.
No, they're in Saigon. True story.
Yeah, they are. So Bond sees
I've
this.
Been there, so I recognize things. I enjoyed this. It was a lovely travelogue.
You've been there too.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you've had all sorts of fun adventures.
Yeah.
So Bond is flying. They're flying towards this big banner that's draped over the building, and Bond's like, "Hi, Carver has a real Oedipus complex, doesn't he?" And I noticed that the look on Carver's face for the picture is like a really bad picture. He like looks angry. Like, I was like, that's a little weird. And so they land the helicopter on the roof. They're brought inside, and while they're kind of pushed aside in this hallways, you see this Chinese guy walk out with his assistant, and Wei Lin takes extra interest in it. And Bond's like, "Huh, a friend of yours?" And she's like, "It's General Chang. What's he doing here?" And he's like, "Okay." So they get taken into the main room where you see, it's like it's interesting because you notice it looks like the room is still being set up. Like there's certain statues being taken out of boxes and some strawling on the ground. It's like, okay. And Carver's there, and he's got his big TV, and he's typing headlines again. And he turns around, he's like, "Oh, Mr. Bond, Mr. Wei Lin, you've forced me to speed up my schedule a bit." And they're like, "Oh, we've already told our governments what you're up to, Carver." He's like, "Really?" Because this says otherwise. And he shows them all these global headlines about crisis and the world's ending, and then he cuts to one that's really great. It has the British flag on one side and the Chinese flag on the other side, and it says, "The Empire will strike back." He's like, "This one's great. It isn't even mine." And they're like, "What's General Chang doing?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, it doesn't matter. This does not really concern you." And Bond's like, "Oh yeah," he makes a quip about how he killed his wife. And he's like, "No, Mr. Bond, you involving her in this is your fault. You got her killed," which in a sense, he's kind of right. Well, not really. He was going to kill her, I guess, because she said you sleep with a gun under your pillow. But the fact that he approached her at all, suspecting that Elliot might be a megalomaniac, does, in a sense, put her in the crosshairs.
Well, when it comes to villains, there does come a point where you want to sort of sympathize with them to a certain extent. And why he killed Paris is because someone was trying to F up his cabbage patch, and unfortunately it was an ex-lover who she betrayed Elliot for.
Yes, and
so I believe this, as Jack Quaid would have said.
Jack Wade, you mean?
No. Who's Arnold Schwarzenegger in Total Recall?
The character name I can't remember.
Quaid.
Is it Jack?
And he says, "Consider this a divorce." I think that's what Elliot Carver did there.
Okay. So Gupta interrupts the meeting, and he says, "The helicopter's waiting, sir." And you actually hear the helicopter in the background. And Carver gestures over to these little toys of Mr. Stamper's. He's like, "Oh, Mr. Stamper's an expert in chakra torture." And he says, "Oh, these perfectly designed instruments to pierce your vital organs and cause the most pain before you die." And Stamper mentions that Mr. Kaufman, or Dr. Kaufman, was a mentor of his, and his record was 52 hours. I'm hoping to break it. And Carver and Bond says, "I would have thought watching your shows is enough of torture, Carver." And that clearly upsets him because he's an egotist. And Carver's like, "Save this one for last. There should be just enough time for Mr. Bond to be able to watch his heart stop beating." And then Carver starts to leave the room, and Bond and Wayland are like, "Yeah, fuck this." And they kick the table over with all the weapons, and they snag the guns, start firing, and there's a bit of an action scene, and he and Wayland, who are handcuffed together, jump out the front window onto this the rooftop with like all the rocks there, and they get behind one of the consoles they're getting fired at. Like, we got to get out of here. And Wayland notices that all the cables for the banner are hanging over the edge. She's like, ooh, she grabs this, breaks one of the pieces off to tie the rope. It's like, I hope this holds. And they have nowhere else to go. So they jump over the edge, and Carver's like, get him. And they're tearing the poster down as they're falling. And I'm thinking, they better do something, because if that poster rips on the bottom, they're dead. And it keeps going all the way down and conveniently does not tear at the very edge. And they're dangling. And I like that you can actually see actual fear in Bond at this moment. Like, he thought they were probably going to die. And he turns around with her, and they start crashing up against this window, which, you know, one of those windows you can't open. And all the employees inside the building are looking like, huh, what's going on? And he and Wayland
they John McClane it, yeah. Yeah,
they totally John McClane it and crash in through the window. And then they just kind of nod, just saying, oh, hi, you know, and they rush outside. And Wayland's like, car. And he's like, no, we're taking the motorcycle. Take the bike, it's faster. So they jump on the bike, and he's like, get behind me, because he wants to have both his hands on the bike.
All right, I'm gonna go take a pee break. You explain this, and I'll be back to say why it's awesome.
She's tries to sit she can't sit directly behind Bond since her hands are cuffed. So she sits kind of on the side of the bike and isn't able to hold on very well. They take off in the bike. Carver's guys take off in their Range Rovers to chase them. And what follows is quite possibly the most ludicrous action sequence in the whole franchise, because it's stretching the point of believability. As ridiculous as the plot of this movie is, what this basically entails in this chase scene is a private security is rushing through the residential area of Saigon, mowing shit down with their machine guns, flying helicopters in and destroying, you know, marketplaces with helicopter blades and firing at everything. And it's like, how do they expect to get out of this? You know, like, what excuse are they going to come up with to justify it? So it's very 90s action movie where you'd always see the thugs in the suits. They're just, you know, the nameless thugs running around and in public, in full view of everyone, just firing their guns everywhere and not remotely worried about witnesses and stuff. But the action itself isn't really bad. You see, Wayland eventually figures out the best way to sit on the bike is to face Verve, sitting in front of Bond, facing the other way. And she's able to call out where the guys are for them as they're racing through the alleys. And she grabs like this one, like this crowbar off. She's like, go up towards the barrel. She's like, what? Move towards the barrel. And she shakes it along on the locks of this container that's holding all these barrels, which is like, in a sense, a miniature version of the stunt from GoldenEye, where Bond, you know, knocks over all of the fuel tanks that come down. And Bond's like, very good. And they keep racing through the streets on the bike. They end up getting cornered because a helicopter's coming after them. So he's like, let's take the high road. And they go up these little,
Like
sheet
bug
iron,
buggy.
that tin roofs or whatever to get up to higher ground. They crash through a house and start driving through there, and they make their way to the rooftop. And typical action movie fashion, they're not considering what might be in front of them or being cautious at all on the off chance they might crash. But they're racing around. The Carver's helicopter's chasing them. They're all firing at them. Eventually, they dodge the helicopter and thinking, how are we going to get out of this? And Bond's like, you thinking what I'm thinking? She's like, yeah. So they rev the engine, and then they take off, and they do this awesome jump over the helicopter, landing on the other side. And I like how they actually crash through the roof of the next building, and they're both like coughing, like because of all the dust and the dirt.
Well, and then Bond's like, pop the clutch.
Yeah, and that's another funny thing that goes on throughout this chase is they're constantly
Working together.
Yeah, they're sniping at each other as to how they should drive the bike, because she wants to sit kind of facing behind him, so that way she would have her hand on one handle on the bike, Bond would have his handle on the other, so they got to really coordinate. So that's really funny. And even funnier is when they crash the bike through the roof, and there's like a couple in bed having sex, and they don't even care that this motorcycle came crashing through and drives off. It's like, oh, whatever. So they take off again, and Bond and Wayland eventually find themselves cornered in the marketplace. The helicopter's blocking them, and insanely, as I mentioned, just teetering on its edge, not even caring how they're going to get out of this. Like, how are you going to explain this to the public and the police as the helicopter's just destroying everything in the marketplace, and they think they're cornered, and Bond's like, no, never. We're never out of it. And he speeds off on the bike and then slides down on the edge, causing the helicopter tip just enough because they throw the clothesline in there to tie up the rotors, and then it just crashes and blows to smithereens.
No, but it's a great line where Wayland says to Bond, and it's like, we're trapped, and Bond is like, never. And they pump up the Barry Norman, and they do like
The Monty Norman.
Monty, you know.
Monty Norman John Barry.
Fine. But they pump up the Bond song, and it is amazing. And it's like, no, there's no such thing as trapped when you're James Bond.
Yes.
Except for that one time.
I like that when they get out of it, that they just go to take a shower, this public bath or whatever, and then she uses her earring finally to pick the lock on the handcuffs to get them loose. And I'm like, if you had this on you, couldn't you have done that before when you guys were on the rooftop? This would have gone a little easier. But whatever. So she picks the lock, and she's like, and then she just cuffs Bond to the really cheapy little pipe, saying, oh, I don't mess around, mister. I work alone, Mr. Bond. And she takes off. And then, like, no problem whatsoever, Bond just yanks the handcuff, and it snaps off the water pipe.
Which I thought was good, because it was kind of a cute moment where it's like, it's not like she was actually trapping him.
Right. But she does miraculously get very far ahead of him, as he snapped the thing off immediately, and he's already lost her in the streets. But then he finds out where she's gone, because this car drives up outside, and these somewhat aggressive guys moving in. He's like, oh, she might be in there. So she's down in the basement of this ready building, and these thugs come in, these Chinese guys, and she starts fighting them and shows off her martial arts skills and takes all these guys out. And,
it's hardcore kung fu.
Yeah, and it's funny because Bond is kind of taking his sweet time walking across the street, and he sees the guy who's been set up to be the lookout, and the lookout's trying to light a cigarette, and a little callback to the opening of the movie where Bond's pretending to have a light, holding up his hand to light it for him. Instead, he goes like this, and the guy's like, what? And punches him and then goes inside. He starts casually walking down the stairs, and he sees her there, and he's like, oh, you got it. And he takes out the last guy for her, and she's like, I could have handled it. And he's like, okay, whatever. So they walk in further, and she just presses this button, and then all of a sudden, this whole room transforms into her high-tech Q lab.
Yeah.
So the Chinese definitely have a leg up in Saigon, because Carver had mentioned that she was head of the Chinese People's Liberation Army or whatever. Who Bond had kind of suspected that. He just didn't know officially who she was up to that point. Mm-hmm. So he sees all these gadgets. It's cool. And he's like, oh, we should send a message to our government. She's like, okay. And then you get the armory. I'll send the messages. And he goes over to the computer, and she steps aside and is like, and of course it's all in Chinese characters. So he's like, oh, yes, maybe you send the messages and I'll get the armory. And she's like, first we have to find the stealth boat. And she's like, there's 14 harbors where this boat could be. And Bond's like, well, it's stealth. She's like, okay, it has to be not very populated. That cuts it down to like 10. And well, it can't be seen in the day, because if it's a wide enough harbor to see in the day, it's not going to work. So she narrows it down to 4 and finds a bunch of reports of missing and dead fishermen from this one in particular. And so she's like, I found it at Halong Bay. And Bond, meanwhile, is playing around looking at all of her arsenal. He picks up a watch he's like, oh, he sees all these watches. She's like, we've made a few improvements. So Bond waits till she turns her head and he kind of pockets the watch. And then he kind of walks over to this one dragon statue to lean his elbow on it, and then just flames shooting out of the mouth. And he kind of takes them back up. And then he picks up a Chinese fan and shoots out all these like spikes. And he's kind of nervous. He's like, oh, I've always been a fan of Chinese technology. And then he notices that one of the thugs gets up. He's like, oh, on your left. And she presses a button, which just like inflates this almost like an airbag and knocks the guy back out. And
I didn't know what that was or what button she hit to do it, but it was kind of a cute moment.
Yeah, it was kind of cute, and it felt kind of like a little callback to the big airbag inflating in the phone booth in Q Lab and GoldenEye. Kind of like that used in the field in a more, I guess you say, practical manner. But it's like, okay. So they take the guns, they take their arsenal, and they go to Howlong Bay. And she's like, well, I found a fisherman who's willing to take us there if we pay him 5,000 American dollars. It's like, I wonder if he'll accept a check. It's like, haha. So they take off on the boat, and they're sitting in the boat. They're riding along, and Wayland's like, oh, how's it going to work with an agent of a corrupt Western government? And Bond's like, and Bond decides not to bother sniping back at her at that point, which is kind of funny. So they take off on the boat, and
when they take off on the boat, there's a great line where it's like, I wouldn't believe that I would be.
That's it.
I wouldn't believe a decadent Western power.
Yes, a decadent corrupt agent of a Western superpower.
And then Bond says, "Well, you haven't, or you couldn't have found a better, decadent, corrupt,
you couldn't
Western
find a better
agent."
Yeah, you couldn't have found a better agent, which is kind of funny. And it almost seems like
but it's reminiscent of the line that they had at the beginning of GoldenEye with M sort of admonishing Bond for being a relic of the Cold War, and then you have Wei Lin admonishing Bond for being part of the corrupt Western civilization. Yeah, I like it. I like how Bond is growing into an international. Bond has always been international. What am I talking about? Keep going, Kat.
So they almost give up trying to find the stealth boat because they've been searching all night and they can't find it. In the last second, they finally see it on the binoculars. They sail to catch up with it, and at some point the boat must stop because they don't even they like tether their boat really cheaply to the stealth boat. And this is where I was talking about the scale being really off because you see how short the gangway is underneath it versus how big it's seen to be on the inside. So yeah, the scale is way off here. So he and Wei Lin are basically placing mines on either side. And Carver, meanwhile, is up in the bridge, and he's telling them how this is going to go. He's like, yeah, we're going to fire a missile. The British will think it's the Chinese, or the Chinese will think it's the British rattling the saber. And then we'll fire another one from the Chinese, and the British will think the Chinese are being belligerent. And I'll be here to provide the pictures and the objective news coverage. But then he notices on the security screen, sees Wei Lin, and he gets mad. He's like, what the hell do I pay you for? Because the security guard, of course, in the most important night ever, is flipping through a magazine instead of watching the cameras. And he races over to the guy, grabs him by the hair, pulls his head back, and the look on the guy's face was almost like he thought Carver was about to kill him. And he just points at the screen. He's like, if she is there, Bond is there. Stamper, kill them. And Stamper's like, I got it. So Wei Lin is the first one captured because Bond notices the security camera at the last second. He ducks out of the way. He shouts to her, but she can't hear over the engines. And Stamper grabs her, pulls her in, and she starts immediately kicking all the other guards. And so Stamper just rams her head up into the ceiling to, like, it doesn't completely knock her out, just really dazes her. And he's like, if she moves, kill her, and you come with me. So then they move around to the other side, and there's a guard that comes out nearby Bond in one of the doorways, and Bond just immediately throws him in the water. Then he kills out another guy, and they're shooting at him, and Stamper and his guys are firing all these bullets. And Bond smartly takes the body of another one of the guards that he's killed, and he kind of leans him forward to let them shoot it and lets him fall in the waters to trick them into thinking that, oh, you just killed me. And Stamper goes back and reports that to Carver, who's happy to hear it. And they bring Wei Lin up to the bridge, and she's finally, and he finally tells her that, poor Mr. Bond, he's not going to be here to see this. He could be, he's currently on his way to the bottom of the ocean. I know, he could be my new anchor man. And she's angrily just tries to kick at him, and then he does this really racist, mocking of her martial arts. And he's the villain, so but he's the villain, so it's fine. This is where he finally explains what his evil plan is.
He killed Terry Hatcher.
Yes, he is going to fire one of the nukes at Beijing, And General Chang is going to be delayed in traffic, so he'll arrive too late to stop it. He'll immediately take control of the country and negotiate a truce with the British. He'll win the Nobel Peace Prize, rise as a great world leader, and the war will be averted. And she's like, well, what do you get? And he's like, oh, nothing really, just broadcasting rights in China for the next 100 years. And but then Bond has snuck in and he starts setting these other bombs, like these grenades attached to other side bombs, and he's setting them around near the engine core, slowly moving through the boat, and he sneaks up on Gupta, who Carver calls on the walkie-talkie to find out if they're ready to launch the bombs or launch the missile. And Bond instead picks up the phone and says, sorry, Elliot, I gotta talk. And Elliot's like, oh shit. So he takes Wayland by gunpoint, and all the other guards are moving along, and Bond standing there with Gupta, and Carver makes sure to tell Stamper, don't shoot him yet. And he decides he's going to try and distract Bond while this other guard sneaks around the back. And Bond's talking, and he's like, come on, Carver, you should let her go. This doesn't concern her. And he's like, oh no, Mr. Bond, it kind of does. And Bond's like, well, you need Gupta to launch the missiles, so you better do as I say. And then Carver asks Gupta, well, are you ready is the missiles ready for launch? And Gupta stupidly says, yeah, press the magic button and Beijing disappears. And Carver's like, well, and a great line. He's like, well, it seems like you have outlived your contract. And he shoots him right in the heart, killed him. And Bond gives this look on his face like he's half surprised and half not. Just great. And then he decides, and he's like, oh, this is really crazy. And Bond's like, well, because that's another thing Carver told him. He's like, Bond, you must realize your predicament, how the impossibility of your predicament or whatever. You're crazy to try and fight me. And Bond's like, well, it's no crazier than starting a war for ratings, which is really absurd. But Bond doesn't want to talk to him anymore if he kills Gupta. And so he presses the detonator, blasting the bombs. Meanwhile, the British Navy, this new ship being commanded by Michael Byrne, a great actor, played the evil Nazi Vogel in Last Crusade.
That's where I remembered him from. Thank you.
Yes, because M has since marched into the war room with Bond's report. Because Wayland apparently did send the messages as Bond told her to, and she finally has shown the admiral and the defense minister that he's the guy with the satellite. He knew about this before it was going to happen. He had the encoder. They did send the Devonshire off course. Here's where it is. He's got a stealth boat because Wayland had discovered that, well, last year there was some stealth technology that got stolen from one of Chang's bases. We tracked it back to Carver, but then the investigation kind of went dark. And so M tells the defense minister to have the Navy and the Chinese sweep for a stealth boat that will be near invisible to radar. And it's like, okay. And I love the look that M gives to the admiral, just smugly, like, see, my investigation paid off. And so the defense minister orders nobody fire at anything. And you cut to Michael Byrne, and he's getting all these orders, and he tells everybody to look for a stealth boat. Do not fire on the Chinese for any reason whatsoever. So they start hunting for it. And so the explosion having happened now on the boat that Bond has set off, Carver's immediately like, put out the fires, put out the damn fires. And Stamper's running downstairs. He's like, oh, Mr. Stamper, will you please kill those bastards? He's been frustrated because, so much for German efficiency, as he says.
Yeah. Well, he's wanted James Bond dead for like most of the movie.
Yes, and Bond has been outfoxing Stamper quite a lot. And Wei-Lin used the chaos of the explosion to escape. So she and Bond then get into full-blown 90s action movie mode where they're just firing their guns throughout the ship, killing as many thugs as they can. And
again, there is a little bit of a weird slow-mo kind of thing.
There is, when she's jumping sideways, firing both of the guns. And that one moment was a little weird. I was like, okay. There's still fire. Chaos is going off, and we cut back to the British ship, and they're like, and one of the subordinates looking at the radar is like, sir, there's something really small, really faint on the radar, but I swear it wasn't there a second ago. And they look at it. He's like, oh, it might be our boat. And they're like, it's on fire. We can track it now. And they notify the Chinese as what's going on. Like, can you see this boat? And Chinese send a report back. Yeah, we can see the stealth boat. Good hunting. We're not going to fire on it unless it turns our way. Good hunting. And he's like, okay, fire. And the British fire a missile, and they hit Carver's ship pretty head on. And that's when the sub-captain of the stealth boat orders everybody to abandon ship. And again, the look on Carver's face with everybody jumping overboard, just abandoning the futile effort to try and put out the fires since they can't outrun this thing. And Carver's just really upset. And once again, Wei-Lin gets captured by Stamper. And Bond...
Oh, yeah. No, I forgot.
Right, she gets captured again. And all the guards and other thugs have since jumped overboard. And Bond makes his way to the bridge, and he's just lost his patience at this point. So he sees the captain and his other subordinate at the computer, and he's just like, yeah, no. He just opens up the gun and just fires through the glass and kills them both, which is great because Captain's an asshole too.
Yeah, no, he's a dick, but like it's all again, this is why I said at the beginning that it seems to be somewhat influenced by the video game, because there's a lot in this scene in the siege of
there was even a moment where Bond took hold of like they had these other smaller missiles that can fire inside, and he launched it at the wall and blow it up. And on the audio commentary, Roger Spottiswoode, with the director, laughs to himself when he says this. I can't believe that on set I improvised that bit on set, thinking we needed more action in the movie. Because he's even looking back and laughing at how action-packed the film is. But he's like, oh, it is what it is, you know?
But also, James Bond is using one-hand machine gun, which I think is sort of a video game trope.
Kind of, yeah. So he fires and kills the captain of summer, and he moves over to the computers, and then all of a sudden Carver comes up behind him and fires, and Bond like drops the gun, and he has him cornered. He's like, Mr. Bond, and he tries to save face, and he's like, oh, you thought you've thwarted me, but no, the missile's ready to fire. And thanks largely to your efforts, all of the evidence is about to be destroyed. Which isn't exactly true, because both of the navies have since been alerted to everything that Carver's been in on and everything that he has. But he's like, so thanks largely to your efforts, this ship is going down. I'm going to escape on a Carver News helicopter covering the whole event. It's going to be a fantastic show. And Bond has since turned on the sea drill of the CVAC because he saw the remote there, and he's like, I may have some breaking news for you, Elliot, because he saw the drill just kind of sitting there swinging on the chains, and Elliot's like, huh? And he turns around, and the drill's just coming his way, and Bond just grabs him and disarms him, and he's like, you forgot the first rule of mass media, Elliot. He's like, give the people what they want. And he awkwardly just kind of pushes him aside, and Carver sits there waiting, going, no, no. And he just kind of stands there and lets himself get sliced and diced to a million pieces.
But he doesn't even get sliced and diced to a million pieces.
Yeah, because they wanted to be PG-13, so you don't get to see it as much as I would want to see it.
I don't even think it was PG-13. It was probably PG.
Yeah, it's like even when the guy fell in the printing press, they had the blood, and like, you should have had this be blood.
Yeah, there was splatters, but it wasn't Dario.
Right, but that's what I mean, is that they
wasn't Milton Press.
That's what I mean, is that they literally have no blood in the scene. He literally disappears when the drill cuts him to pieces. And
you know what? The drill came out of nowhere.
Jonathan Pryce said when they filmed this, it was a real drill, and he was dependent on Pierce Brosnan pulling him out of the way in time, which he does. He did not get diced by this thing, which was kind of cool. And there was a lot of trust, and it worked. And he kills him, and then the drill just kind of severs all the computer modules, and Bond runs over to the missiles, and he's trying to figure out how to disable the launcher on it.
Yeah.
But then Stamper shows up, standing before him with Wei Lin tied up in all of these chains, and Bond's like, it's over, Stamper, just let her go. And he's like, not between you and me. And then then Wei Lin tosses Bond these charges. She's like, here, just tie him onto just attach him onto the missile. It'll ignite when the missiles fire. And Bond's like, never mess with a woman. They're always right. And he's setting it up, and Stamper's just mad, and he's like, oh, really? And he just drops the chain, letting her go underwater. And then Stamper just jumps onto the cargo hold, and he starts fighting Bond. And it starts as a pretty fierce fight, punching the hell out of each other. He eventually grabs Bond, starts slamming him against the rigging, saying, for Kava, Gupta, Kaufman. And they just beating him some more. And it's like,
yeah,
this is funny because this actor, Guts Otto, got the role by walking into the office and saying, I am big, I am bad, I am blonde, I am German. And that's a lot of, and I'm like, of course, and they even made the joke, so much for German efficiency. And I'm watching this fight thinking, this is the type of fight I wanted to see Indiana Jones get in with Colonel Dietrich and Raiders of the Lost Ark. That never happens. I felt that was missing in that movie because Dietrich, of the three main villains, is the one who's closest in physique to Indy. And I'm like, and you kind of want to see Indy. You always great seeing Indy punch Nazis. I really want to see that. We didn't get it. Whereas here, even though Stamper's not a Nazi, clearly they're playing up the whole Stormtrooper type appearance of him. And so I like that this kind of fight that's going on. And even though it's funny because in next week's film, Renard's the guy who supposedly can't feel any pain, but Bond plunges the knife into Stamper's shoulder. Stamper just looks at it and kind of laughs. And Bond picks it up and he stabs him like through the chest, and Stamper just laughs evilly again, grabbing onto Bond. throws
he
it over.
likes it.
Yeah, he likes it. And Bond kind of finally pulls himself out of the way by pulling the rig on the missile to slide it off the launch, which means that he saved Beijing from destruction. And the missiles are now stuck trapping Stamper's foot. And he can't get it off, so Stamper grabs onto Bond as he's trying to slide off the rigging into the water. And he grabs onto his vest, and he's like, "We die together, Mr. Bond." Oh, he also told him, "I owe you an unpleasant death, Mr. Bond," which is a great line.
Mm-hmm.
And now that Bond's hanging over the edge, he's like, "We died together, Mr. Bond." And Bond's
by the way, meanwhile, Michelle Yeoh is drowning to death.
Yeah, underwater way too long. Especially since the chains are wrapped around her so tight that she probably shouldn't even be able to breathe anyway.
Well, you can't breathe underwater.
Well, I mean, she wouldn't been able to breathe even before that. It's constricting. Like, she wouldn't even be able to hold her breath or make use of what she has because of how constricted it is. So anyway, Bond's trying to unzip the vest and he can't do it because it's stuck. So he improvises and reaches up, pulls the knife out of Stamper's chest. And that's the first time Stamper seems to show any vulnerability. It's like, ugh! Like, it hits him. And then Bond cuts the vest, flips right out, falls into the water. Stamper's like, he sits back, and then the missiles are starting to ignite, and it ignites the charges first, which is key because otherwise they would have been armed, and it blows up Stamper and the entire stealth boat to smithereens as Bond is safely deep underwater, kissing Whalen and giving her some oxygen. They magically, he undoes the chains, gets her up onto this piece of debris.
No. Go back just one second there.
Why?
How exactly was James Bond giving Whalen?
I don't know, but that's kind of the idea that they're trying to imply here, which is a bit ridiculous. She's already passed out, and he's like kissing her, but trying to kind of like doing underwater CPR. I don't know how this fucking works. Anyway,
underwater CPR.
That's basically what he's doing. You saw it.
Okay.
I didn't say it was logical. He just does it.
It is illogical.
I just said that he does it. I didn't say it was logical. So he takes her back up to shore or up to the surface, and they're lying on this debris. And we radio back. We check back into the war room, and the admiral reports, or the British captain of the new ship, Michael Byrne, reports from the Bedford, Carver's ship destroyed, and he probably went down with the ship. And M's really happy about it. Smiles. She's happy. She turns to Moneypenny. He's like, "Moneypenny, tell them that." Headlines for the paper. Tell him that Carver drowned at sea, went down with his luxury yacht in the South China Sea, presumed drowned. Some reports suggest that the mogul may have committed suicide, which would be an insult to Carver because the implication is his ego couldn't take that his network went off the air so much that he killed himself. So, and I like that M kind of relishes that moment, even though it's a bit corrupt because she's now doing the same thing Carver was doing.
No, but that's also... I don't know, but that's also why it is so prescient. However, I do wish that I could live in a timeline where Dame Judi Dench had said, "Elliot Carver, dead from autoerotic asphyxiation on his private yacht at the South China Sea."
Yes, unfortunately, Xenia Onatopp is not in this movie to do that for us. So
damn it!
So, and then in another funny moment, we cut back to the ocean, and Bond and Whalen are lying on the debris, but you see the HMS Bedford shining flashlights around, and they're calling out for Bond and Whalen on their loudspeaker. And I'm like, you realize they don't have a bullhorn, and there's nobody on deck. So even if they wave their arms around, you're not really going to see them. And the ship is passing by, so even if Bond and Whalen were to try and get their attention, they wouldn't really be able to. So it was kind of funny.
I do recall Jack Wade saying that he would show up and help later, much like GoldenEye. He was like, "Don't worry, we'll be there later."
Yeah, that later. So then they decide to just start making out instead, saying, "What are we gonna?" And Whalen asks them, "What are we gonna do?" "Oh, we can just stay here," and that's Tomorrow Never Dies. And I love how the final music cue doesn't end as it's fading to black until after the title saying "In Loving Memory of Albert R. Cubby Broccoli" is on screen, which is cool because they solidified that as being the true end of the film.
Yes. No, and that was something, because we've discussed it before, and I was like, is it the final bow of Cubby? And so it was a little bit of a,
But he final bow more so was GoldenEye because he had nothing to do with this film.
No, but I appreciate a proper memorial,
I do.
especially in these kinds of legacy films. And I like it when it is acknowledged and we are moving forward. Hell, I like it when someone dies and then they say James Bond will return.
Which is interesting, but okay. So this movie, it's, as we said, it's definitely a 90s action movie.
Yes.
There's definitely some plot logic issues with not informing them from the British from the beginning that Carver has some heads up on this. Again, the geographic issues of how Stamper's able to travel nearly a third of the way around the world in a second, and the fact that they flew this giant C-130. Oh yeah, no problem, Bond. We'll fly you from Okinawa down here to do it. We'll trust that you alone are going to be able to find the Devonshire, even though, as Jack Wade said, they had a very strong invested interest in avoiding World War III, which means that they probably should have sent some guys down there too, just to make sure. And I assume the Vietnamese wouldn't have wanted a war to start either. So, because this is obviously, not the Vietnam War anymore, so they probably could have even notified Vietnamese authorities, and they would have helped them out for it, because obviously they wouldn't be interested in a massive war happening right off their shores,
But I think it's all precipitated by the fact that Jack Wade is there. Bond is surprised. But like, I posted a meme a little while ago, and it was Bond and Jack Wade in the little car from GoldenEye. And when I see that shot, all I can think of is Kermit and Fozzie. And it's like, oh, Fozzie will help Kermit do anything. And he's the best person for the job for it. And so when it's like, oh, do you need a Hercules? Sure. No problem. You know how to get things done, my friend. And I think that Jack Wade trusts Bond. And that's why the Brosnan era is different from the rest of the era, because it's almost an acknowledgement of the lack of Felix Leiter, but the new Felix Leiter, who is Jack Wade, is really, really on his side as well. Different styles, but they are absolutely in cahoots.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard earlier, but I was mentioning that that the motorcycle chase is one of the most absurd action sequences in the entire pantheon of Bond, because it's taking that 90s trope of like a bunch of private security are going to run into into the residential areas, no disguises, nothing, just opening fire with their machine gun, setting their helicopter gun, machine gun, not worried about anything. It's like there is no logic to this at all. It's that bad.
No, you're absolutely correct.
If you go through previous Bond films, you don't see stuff like this. They're usually singling out only Bond, and they're trying to stay on private roads, or just a couple guys running through the street. You don't have this level of, I mean, even as over the top as the tank chase was in GoldenEye, it's like that made more sense because that's Bond trying to catch up with the villain. Whereas here, it's like villains who are trying their best to hide and pretend to not be involved in what's going on, playing both sides, just not even trying anymore. And it's like, okay. And that is very much a 90s action movie type thing. Yeah. Especially the whole climax with the amount of shooting and action and all of that. But I think it's still a very entertaining movie for what it is. And it's very prescient for its day because, let's face it, 24-hour news networks exist to con gullible people into thinking that they're getting unbiased news when it's basically like tribalism. And if your tribalism is liberal, you lean one way and watch certain news networks. If your tribalism is conservative, you lean another way and will watch other news networks. The movie clearly making allusions to like Ted Turner and Roger Ailes at the time for CNN and Fox.
And
not over the top.
William Randolph Hearst.
Yeah, that's another one, and he even mentions Hearst about that because it's true. As Carver says, Hearst is himself told his reporters, "You provide the photographs, I'll provide the war," which is something that Hearst actually did at the turn of the century. So he's pretty much a schmuck in there too. And it's funny when Bond called Carver insane. Carver's like, "The difference between insanity and genius is measured only by success."
Mm-hmm.
So he's one of those people. And I love how over the top he is because it matches other very publicly cartoonish characters we've had in the last, 5-6 years. And it's like, you think it's over the top and then you realize it's really not. And that's kind of sad. The only thing I'll say that Carver probably missed the boat on is that he didn't really need to actually manipulate events by actually doing these military maneuvers. He could have just used the news to, con gullible people into believing whatever shit he types up. rather than actually starting a war. And I think, reading between the lines, it's not so much that he's getting the broadcasting rights in China. It's that at that time, China consisted of like a third of the world's population. And because of the state-run media there, he basically gets to be the sole author of all of China's news. I mean, for a guy like him, that's got to be an ego trip like nothing you've ever seen, to be the leader of the news world for a third of the world's population. So obviously they're not going to have him say that out loud, because even though Bond movies up to this point had not been released in China, they'd always try to get it released there. This one did not succeed. But I think that might be the reason why he doesn't actually just come out and say what he's also really after. That he's like, hey, I want to be the sole author of all this, and it tracks for how crazy he is. But he could have done that and gotten his popularity just from like playing the media, much like the 24-hour networks do today. But it is an interesting bit, and I think he's a great supervillain. It feels like it doesn't feel like villain of the week. I find Carver to be a very memorable character, as is Gupta, despite the fact that they cut out all of the card throwing tricks that Gupta did, which is the whole reason they cast
Ricky Jay. Yeah,
they cast him specifically for that, and then you can see it on the deleted scenes, which is cool. But they didn't end up using any of it in the movie. But I still like that he's there, because I think he plays that character well. And Stamper, of course, awesome for another, admittedly they're trying to repeat the old Red Grant trope, but I think it works. And of course, Dr. Kaufman, talk about a memorable scene stealer for one scene in this whole movie. And the whole franchise, even for a guy I wouldn't have thought to pop up in a Bond movie. And I love Dr. Kaufman and his whole personality, and the way he just, the way he interacts with Bond as a professional, how embarrassed he is, but it's so good. And it's like, we need this. And yeah, we spoke about how Terry Hatcher thought it was a thankless role. Yeah, they should have cast Monica Bellucci, but I like that it does add a little bit more depth to Bond, because they heavily implied that this wasn't just a past fling. There was more to that. He is a bit sensitive to her, even though I do blame him for getting her killed. So I really do like this movie, despite that a lot of people give it shit. I think it's very good. I really do like it.
I do too. I do as well. I think it is. I think it's one of the first DVDs I ever bought. And I really enjoy this cast. I enjoy all the characters. I like all the Easter eggs. And even if an Easter egg is the guy who played Sergeant Apone from Aliens being the Halo instructor, like, there are things in this movie, and it reinforces James Bond to me in the 90s. And I would have been, I don't know, 19 years old when this movie came out. And I loved it. It was great. It was a great 90s action movie, but it was also classic, because this would have been the time that I was going back and revisiting things like From Russia with Love or Goldfinger or The Spy Who Loved Me. This was back in my rediscovery of James Bond, not just watching it as a kid when my dad was looking at the TV. It was like, okay, I'm going to watch this and find out if James Bond is good. And I would compare and contrast. This is the movie that actually introduced me to James Bond in a film level. And I didn't like it very much at the beginning. The first time I saw it, not my favorite. But going back and taking a look at it, like, it encapsulates. We've made the rule. Like, don't judge it against other movies. Judge it against other James Bond movies.
Right.
And this is a good James Bond movie.
Yeah, and like I said, I think unlike in GoldenEye, where Bond, it feels like every scene he's at work. He's really trying to put on that professional impression. Whereas here, I feel he's a bit looser, he's a bit funnier, a bit smoother, a little bit sensitive, and he feels like he's coming into the role a bit more.
His hair is too long.
Is it?
Yes.
And I didn't notice. I did notice, however, that despite that they get soaked from swimming around in the water, that his hair is still perfectly combed and coiffed when he gets out of the water.
Yes.
Unlike Lynn. So that was kind of funny. But
you have Martinis.
That's right. What do you give it?
7.
I give it an 8.
Okay.
Because I can't really ignore the plot logic issues and some of that. And yeah, it is a 90s action movie. I can't really get around that fact, but I think it has really great replay value. Very fun movie. I don't get why so many people hate it. It's like, given that it's like, have you seen Diamonds Are Forever? And it's like, and when people also say, they criticize this movie saying the plot is too over the top and ridiculous. And it's like, is it really that much more ridiculous than some of the other Bond plots we've seen in the Moore and Connery eras? Like, really? I don't know. Maybe they thought it was over the top and cartoonish because of, compared against GoldenEye, because of Carver, Jonathan Pryce's portrayal of Carver, which again I loved. I mean, in GoldenEye, they never really told you how Trevelyan was able to build this whole base and satellite dish and everything in Cuba, of all places, without Castro knowing about it. That didn't seem ridiculous to people. I guess not. So I don't know. I don't get why people criticize it in that way. I mean, yes, the ridiculous stuff can totally be hurled at Die Another Day, but I don't feel that it's really as warranted for this movie, because it feels more like a classic Bond plot, even though the execution is more like a 90s action movie.
Well, I'm looking back and I'm like, okay, so the world, or Tomorrow Never Dies, I look back and I cross-reference. I gave Tomorrow Never Dies a 7, and Live and Let Die gets a 4. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I gave this one an 8. I gave GoldenEye an 8.5. Because nothing really bugs me about this movie. It's just that I admit it's not hitting the classic Bond highs that the other ones do, because it's trying too hard to be a 90s action movie.
All right. Well, you know what? Considering my 10 out of 10 for GoldenEye and License to Kill, I really can't argue against action movies representative of their times.
Well, no, anyway. I don't mean 90s action movies as an insult. I just mean that they're not. It's a very different type of movie from a Bond movie, and it's trying to hew to the classic Bond plot, but because it has to make concessions to the type of action scenes that you get in a 90s action movie, that you have a lot more over the top action scenes, like action driving the film more than story. Like GoldenEye, I felt was more story and plot driven, whereas this one felt a lot more action driven. But I do think they did a good job with the stakes. Like, I felt the stakes were a lot higher here, unlike Thunderball, where because the threat was not publicized, you didn't, like, nobody in Nassau was aware that anything was wrong and everybody went about their normal lives. Whereas here, it just feels like the pressure's on because they're constantly being reminded with all the news headlines what's going on in the world.
But it's like Thunderball is sort of like Bond punching a clock. Whereas this movie feels like Bond is punching a clock, but he has a vested interest based on his ex-girlfriend.
Yeah.
And that's something that from this point forward, it's always something personal.
Yeah, that's something else I guess I could ding it for, is that you figure he would have mentioned something about Paris when he killed Carver.
Well, but the only thing I could come up with is that Bond would say, as he drives the drill into Elliot, he says, "Elliot, you forgot one thing. We'll always have Paris." Anyway, Steve is here.
There were talks also of Wei Lin potentially getting a spinoff, but the reason it didn't happen supposedly is because it was decided that because she'd already played that basically the same character in other Hong Kong films, that it would be redundant. So I do highly recommend you check out some of Michelle Yeoh's earlier work. It's great.
And whatever you do, don't watch Star Trek Discovery. Steve is here.
Hi everybody. How you guys doing?
Very well, very well. How are you, sir? I haven't seen you in a dog's age. How are things in Nam?
Great show. I would give this 7 martinis.
Mm-hmm.
This movie, a solid 7 martinis, and that's about it.
Have you seen the film?
Oh yeah, once. And the Coon's Age, but Kat, I love your rundown, and the 8 is a little high for me, but yeah. I can see where you go.
I just this is like one of the ultimate Bond popcorn movies for me. It's like
Oh, yeah.
brain, just watch it, enjoy it. It's not, I love it.
And
Yeah.
to be fair, Kat, the only reason I drop it from an 8 to a 7 is because of the weird, awkward slow motion moments.
I think they only did that twice though, right?
3 times.
But
So there was on the Devonshire.
the 90s action stuff is pretty much what I loved about the movie.
So there was the bit on the Devonshire when they're evacuating. There's a bit with Wei Lin on the stealth boat. What was the third one?
I forget, but I remember seeing it and I was like, I can't believe you did this again.
Oh, and Michelle Yeoh. Anything with Michelle Yeoh.
Michelle
Guaranteed.
Yeoh's fantastic.
I'm in. I'm always. So
Always.
cool.
Pay attention to the Fantasmagorium show for our next podcast about crazy rich Asians.
And Michelle, yeah.
Well, she's in that.
And yes.
I would like to go to the chat. What's going on in the chat, Steve?
Let's go to the chat, dude. I don't know. Who's over here? Oh, look at this.
Well, Tiki Fire.
Yes.
Tiki Fire, the Retro Clubhouse.
Did we already do this?
No, we haven't.
No, not at all.
We all did. Oh, that's
No, the amazing Tiki Fire had a great.
amazing. Yes.
Yes, she is amazing. Maybe not the casting of all the roles in The World Is Not Enough.
Right. I was like, no, I don't know.
I agree.
We'll talk about The World Is Not Enough when I watch it again.
Yes, right.
It's
William
been
Randolph.
so long.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Roger Ailes
absolutely.
did all those guys.
Well,
a newspaper?
Yep,
that
the
is,
newspaper.
yeah, it's a newspaper. He really loves her. It's true.
Yes.
I really, really love her.
Well, I think that James Bond actually did show affection to Paris Carver.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so he says at least that's the kissing the dead woman implication is. Yes, that he really loved her, which is why they have the romantic beat there. And I think I like the music in that scene as well. It's trying to make it.
The music's cool because it pulls the emotion out of that. Because without that, I'm like, that's a weird scene, right? All right.
It is. I think that.
Or it's a little moreish. I think we're just talking about that. Yeah,
no, Tomorrow Never Dies is definitely the most Roger Moore sort of homage that the Daniel Craig era does.
Pierce Brosnan.
Pardon me.
Not Die Another Day?
No, because Die Another Day is bad. But I mean, like when I think of good Roger Moore movies, I'm I think that Tomorrow Never Dies is a good cover song by Pierce Brosnan of a Roger Moore.
It's kind of an oxymoron, right? Good Roger Moore movies.
I see where you're going with this one. I see where you're going with this one, Tiki Fire Retro Clubhouse, that you would trade Jack Wade for Christmas Jones any day, but no, Jack Wade is too entertaining. I would love to see a series around Jack Wade. Carver would just buy everyone off, including the guy. Yeah, it's probably what
totally, right?
Buy them off.
That's what he did.
John Woo was popular back then. Yeah, yes, he was. Yeah.
Well, and that's because of the
did offer him a Bond movie, turned it down.
All that gunplay. Remember that? Oh, dude.
He's talking about specifically, I think, the slow motion stuff too.
Oh yeah. When he introduced that great gunplay, dude, I was into cinema. I thought that was great.
All right, Tiki Fire says 8 martinis for him. Not Brosnan's best, but not his worst. Dug him working with a Chinese agent, and Michelle Yeoh is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, she is.
Yeah.
Tiki Fire.
Sniping back and forth about them.
I think 8 martinis is a little high, but I'm at 7, so it's the same thing, pretty much. Anyway.
No, it's good. Well, and Tiki Fire, thank you so much, Tiki Fire.
Great review again. Yeah, because you guys are the best on the internet. If I do say so myself.
Oh, thank you. We have a lot of fun here.
We do. We have a blast. I love talking about James Bond with Kat because it's like talking about, things that I know about with someone who knows about more
about it than you do. I know. I love it.
Learning is my favorite.
I know. It's my jam.
So,
anywho, all right, here we go.
without
Somebody else?
any further, I suppose there are only two more things to say.
Well, before you do that, thank you
All
for
right.
letting me chime in.
Oh, anytime.
You're part of every show.
when there are quartermasters in town.
Yeah, thanks. And I love the show. I think you guys do a brilliant job. So here we go.
Thanks.
So yeah, I guess just like James Bond, Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns will return next week with
The World Is Not Enough.
It's really not enough.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. I'm happy. Well, it's more of a
Foolish
you know,
sentiment. It's a family motto.
a family motto.
It's a foolish sentiment.
Anyway, guys, James Bond will return.
Bye.
Bye. Wait, that was weird. Why do I have to sound like a Muppet?
I don't know. Muppet.
End the show. End the show.
Am I supposed to end the show? Okay.